For 3 years, former Detective Declan has accepted the official story. His sister Corinne, a brilliant financial analyst, buckled under pressure and simply walked away from her life. The discovery of her corporate security fob in an airport trash can seemed to seal the narrative that she fled the country. But a late-night call from a data recovery specialist reveals a detail the original investigators missed. The fob's internal memory shows its last scan wasn't at the airport, but at a private hangar owned by the CEO she worked for, just minutes before a mysterious, unscheduled flight took off. What that specialist found would unravel a web of lies 3 years in the making. It was a single thread that, when pulled, would expose a truth far darker than a simple disappearance. Join us as we uncover what really happened to Corinne. The weight of an unanswered question is a heavy thing. For Declan, it had settled deep in his bones, a constant, dull ache that reminded him of the man he used to be, a detective, someone who found answers for a living. But for 3 years, the biggest question of his life had remained stubbornly silent. He ran a small security consulting business now, a quiet life in a quiet town, far from the city precinct where he'd once worn a badge. He told himself it was a choice, but he knew he was running from the one case he couldn't solve: his sisters. Corinne was the brilliant one, the one who navigated the cutthroat world of high finance in Manhattan with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. Declan was the protector, the big brother who looked out for her. Yet when she vanished, he had been useless. The official report was neat, tidy, and soul-crushing. Corinne, stressed and overworked, had emptied her personal bank account, packed a bag, and disappeared. Her work security fob, found by a cleaner in a trash can at JFK's International Terminal, was the final piece of the puzzle. It was a narrative of a woman who had simply had enough and chosen to escape. Declan, exhausted by months of dead ends, had eventually forced himself to accept it. It was easier than believing the alternative. The anniversary was next week, 3 years. He was sitting in his dim office staring at a photo of him and Corinne as kids when his phone buzzed. It was Sid, a freelance tech specialist Declan occasionally hired for jobs. He was a socially awkward genius who found more comfort in code than in conversation. "Hey, Sid, what's up?" Declan asked, his voice flat. "The fob," Sid said, skipping any pleasantries. "The one from your sister's case file. You said I could use it to test that cloning software." "Yeah? Did it work?" "Better," Sid said, a rare hint of excitement in his voice. "The police lab did a surface-level data pull. They confirmed the fob's ID and the last known time it pinged a reader. Standard stuff. But they didn't do a deep dive on the memory chip. They didn't look at the raw log." Declan sat up straighter. "What are you talking about, Sid?" "This fob doesn't just say when it was last used. It logs the specific ID of the reader it connected with. Think of it like a unique address. The reader ID logged in the fob's memory from its last scan. It doesn't belong to any of the systems at JFK." A cold stillness spread through Declan's office. "What are you saying?" "I cross-referenced the reader's manufacturer ID against a database," Sid explained, his words coming faster now. "It's a high-end security system, the kind used in private facilities. I dug a little deeper into the service records for that specific reader ID. Declan. It's registered to a hangar at a private airfield in Teterboro, New Jersey." Declan's knuckles were white on the armrest of his chair. Teterboro was where corporate jets and private charters flew, a place for the ultra-wealthy to avoid the lines at JFK. "Whose hangar, Sid?" Declan's voice was a low growl. There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking. "The hangar is leased by a shell corporation called Finch Aviation, but the parent company, it's Omnicorp Financial. That was your sister's company, right? The CEO was a guy named Alistair Finch." The neat, tidy story that Declan had forced himself to live with for 3 years shattered into a million pieces. The fob hadn't been her farewell note at a public airport. It was a breadcrumb, dropped at the last place she was seen alive, a place owned by her powerful boss. The dull ache in Declan's bones was gone, replaced by the electric hum of adrenaline he hadn't felt since he'd taken off his badge. The unanswered question was no longer silent. It was screaming. And for the first time in 3 years, Declan knew he had to find the answer, no matter where it led. The next morning, Declan was a different man. The lethargy was gone, replaced by a focused energy that felt both familiar and foreign. He drove the 2 hours to Teterboro, the quiet hum of his car, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his mind. The airfield was a world unto itself, sleek, private jets parked in neat rows, the air smelling of money and jet fuel. He found the hangar registered to Finch Aviation easily enough. It was a large, windowless, gray building, set back from the others, surrounded by a high-security fence topped with razor wire. A single reinforced gate was the only way in, manned by a guard in a sharp uniform. This wasn't a place you just wandered into. Declan parked at a distance, watching. For hours he sat there, the ex-cop in him taking over, observing patterns. He saw a black SUV with tinted windows arrive. A man in a tailored suit got out and spoke to the guard. He was tall, with a ramrod-straight posture and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. The man didn't just look like security. He radiated an aura of quiet, lethal competence. Declan took a picture with his phone's telephoto lens and sent it to Sid. The reply came back in minutes. Marcus Thorne, head of security for Omnicorp, ex-Special Forces, Finch's guy. He's been with him for over a decade. The guy's a ghost online, but company records say he handles all of Finch's personal and corporate protection. Thorne was the gatekeeper. Declan knew a direct approach was pointless. He needed another way in, another angle. The answer, he realized, was to go back to the beginning. Back to Corinne. He still had the keys to her apartment. It had been held in probate, a time capsule of the last days of her life. After 3 years, the estate was finally clearing it out next month. Declan called the lawyer, pulled a few strings as next of kin, and got permission for one last walkthrough. Stepping inside felt like stepping into a memory. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but it was exactly as she'd left it. Her running shoes were by the door. A half-finished book was on the nightstand. It was in her home office that his focus narrowed. Her work laptop was on the desk. He already knew the police had found it wiped clean, factory reset. But next to it was a legal pad. It was blank, but as Declan tilted it to the light, he saw it. The faint, ghostly impressions of writing from the page that had been torn off. It wasn't a note. It was a string of characters, an IP address. He snapped a picture and sent it to Sid. Find out what this is, and see if you can get me a name, a real name, not a shell company. Declan continued his search. He looked for hidden drives, for journals, for anything. In a box in her closet, tucked away under a pile of old college sweaters, he found a small, leather-bound journal. It wasn't a diary. It was filled with notes, dates, and numbers. Most of it was financial jargon he didn't understand, but one entry stood out, dated 2 weeks before she disappeared. He thinks I don't see it. The numbers don't add up. It's not just bad investments. It's a hole, a black hole. He's feeding it with new money to pay off the old. How long has this been going on? His phone buzzed. It was Sid. That IP address is for a private server hosted in the Cayman Islands. It's registered to a blind trust, totally anonymous. It's a digital fortress, Declan. Getting into that will be next to impossible without a password. Declan stared at the journal. A hole. A black hole. His sister had found something. Something big enough to get her disappeared. He looked back at the legal pad, at the faint indentations. Below the IP address was another, shorter string of characters he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't a password. It looked like a book title. The Labyrinth Key. He searched her bookshelf, and there it was. An old, worn-out copy of a spy novel they had both loved as kids. The main character was a female codebreaker. Her code name was Cassandra. He remembered teasing Corinne, calling her Cassandra whenever she figured out a puzzle before he did. He called Sid back. I think I have the password, he said, his voice tight. Try Cassandra. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, just the frantic sound of typing. Declan held his breath. I'm in, Sid whispered, his voice filled with awe. Declan, what did your sister do? This isn't just a backup. It's a mirror of the entire Omnicorp executive server. And there's a folder here. It's labeled insurance policy. The truth was there. Declan knew it. Corinne, meticulous and brilliant, had known she was in danger. She had built herself a digital fortress and left him the key. Now, he had to find the courage to open the door and face whatever was inside. Sid worked for hours, carefully downloading and decrypting the files from the offshore server. He set up a secure line so Declan could view the contents from his own laptop. As the first files from the insurance policy folder opened on his screen, Declan felt a chill settle over him. It was a maze of spreadsheets, internal memos, and encrypted emails. It was the anatomy of a crime. Corinne had laid it all out with painstaking detail. Alistair Finch wasn't just a CEO. He was the architect of a massive Ponzi scheme, one of the largest in history. He was using funds from new investors to pay out fake returns to older ones, creating an illusion of immense profitability while the entire company was a hollow shell, rotting from the inside. The numbers in Corinne's journal suddenly made sense. She hadn't just found a hole, she had discovered the abyss. But the most damning evidence was in an audio subfolder. There were dozens of files, each one a discreetly recorded conversation. Corinne had been using a recording app on her phone for weeks. He listened to her voice, steady and professional, as she questioned executives about discrepancies. He heard their evasive, nervous replies. Then he found the recordings of Alistair Finch. The first was from a week before she vanished. "Corinne, you're one of my brightest analysts." Finch's voice was smooth, fatherly. "But you're looking in places you don't need to. Focus on the quarterly reports. Leave the long-term projections to me." "With respect, sir," Corinne replied, her voice unwavering. "The projections are based on assets that don't seem to exist. I can't sign off on these reports." The final recording was from the morning of the day she disappeared. It was short and chilling. "I've compiled a full report, Alistair," Corinne said, the formality gone. "If you don't self-report to the SEC by the end of the day, I will." There was a long pause. When Finch spoke again, his voice was stripped of all its warmth. It was cold, flat, and menacing. "I think you and I need to have a serious discussion about your future with this company. My car will pick you up at 5. We'll go somewhere private and sort this out." Declan slammed his laptop shut. That was it. The severance package. The private meeting. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a death sentence. Finch had lured her into a trap, and Marcus Thorne was the man who would have sprung it. Rage burned in Declan's chest, hot and pure. But his training kicked in, cooling it into a sharp, calculated point. He had the proof, more than enough to bring down Finch and his entire empire. But who could he trust? Finch was a billionaire with deep connections. A man like that had police and politicians on his payroll. Handing this over to his old precinct felt like a gamble. He needed someone outside the local sphere of influence, someone with federal power. He remembered a name from his academy days, Reese, a guy who'd been top of their class, now a special agent with the FBI's white-collar crime division in New York. They hadn't spoken in years, but Declan still had his number. He made the call. He laid out the whole story, from the fob to the server. Reese was silent for a long moment. "This is big, Declan. Bigger than you can imagine," Reese finally said. "Don't do anything. Don't contact anyone else. I'm getting a team together. We need that server data, but we also need to tie Thorne to the physical act. A good lawyer could argue Finch just wanted to scare her." Reese was right. They had the motive, but they needed the final piece, the confession, the witness, the body. Declan knew he couldn't just sit back and wait. Thorne was the key. He had to make Thorne panic. Using a burner phone and a voice modulator, Declan sent a simple, anonymous text message to Marcus Thorne. It contained only the IP address of the Cayman Islands server and 5 words, "The insurance policy is open." He then attached a GPS tracker to the undercarriage of his own car and drove to Thorne's upscale suburban home, parking it down the street. He didn't want to follow Thorne himself. It was too risky. Instead, he took a cab to a nearby diner and watched the tracker's signal on his phone. For 2 hours, the dot remained stationary. Then, just after midnight, it started to move. Fast. Thorne wasn't heading to the office. He wasn't going to the airport. He was driving north, away from the city toward the secluded, wooded estates of upstate New York. Declan watched the dot move across the map, his heart pounding. He called Reese. "He's on the move," Declan said. "He's heading for a property Finch owns near the Catskills, a private hunting lodge." "We see him," Reese said. "We've got a surveillance team on him. Stay put, Declan. Let us handle it." But Declan couldn't stay put. This was his sister. His case, he got in another cab and gave the driver the address. "Get me there as fast as you can," he said. He had to be there. He had to look the man who took his sister in the eye when the truth finally came out. The hunting lodge was set deep in the woods, miles down a private, unpaved road. The cab dropped Declan at the entrance, and he made the rest of the way on foot, moving through the trees like a ghost, his years of detective work guiding his steps. Up ahead, he could see the lodge, a grand structure of dark wood and stone. A single vehicle was parked outside, Thorne's black SUV. The house was dark, but a faint light emanated from behind it. Declan circled around, staying in the shadows. The light was coming from a powerful flashlight. It was Thorne. He was standing near an old, stone-lined well, a shovel in his hands. He wasn't just looking, he was digging. Frantically. Declan knew the FBI was close, but he couldn't wait. He stepped out from the trees. "Looking for something, Marcus?" Thorne spun around, the shovel held like a weapon. His face was pale in the beam of his flashlight, his eyes wide with shock and fury. "You," he snarled. "It was you." "What did you bury here, Marcus?" Declan asked, his voice steady, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "What did Finch pay you to hide?" Thorne lunged. He was faster than Declan expected, swinging the heavy shovel. Declan dodged, the metal head whistling past his ear and slamming into a tree. The force of the blow splintered the wood. Declan knew he couldn't win a direct fight against a man like Thorne. He had to use his head. "It doesn't matter what you do to me," Declan said, backing away slowly. "The FBI has the server. They have everything. Finch is going down. You can go down with him? Or you can tell me what happened to her. Where is she?" "You know nothing," Thorne grunted, advancing on him. "I know Finch's car picked her up at 5, Declan said, reciting the facts from the recording. "I know he lured her to the hangar, and I know you were waiting for her." For a split second, Thorne's expression faltered. The certainty in Declan's voice had hit its mark. In that moment of hesitation, the night erupted. The woods filled with shouts, blinding lights, and the sound of men moving through the underbrush. "FBI! Drop your weapon!" Thorne was surrounded. He looked from the approaching agents to Declan, his face a mask of trapped desperation. He dropped the shovel. It was over. Under the harsh glare of the FBI's floodlights, the scene was processed. Thorne was cuffed and led away, his face grim and silent. Alistair Finch was arrested in his penthouse apartment in Manhattan just before dawn, taken completely by surprise. It was Reese who walked over to Declan as the forensics team began carefully excavating the ground near the well. "He confessed in the car," Reese said quietly. "The whole thing. They never intended for her to leave that hangar alive. They forced her onto Finch's jet. Thorne, he said they flew out over the Atlantic. An hour out, they opened the door." Declan closed his eyes. The brutal final image he had avoided for 3 years was now there. Stark and unavoidable. "They didn't bury her here," Reese continued, his voice soft. "They buried her laptop, her phone, everything she had on her that day. He was trying to destroy the last of the physical evidence before we found it." A few months later, Alistair Finch and Marcus Thorne were convicted on all charges. The Ponzi scheme made national news, but for Declan, it was all just noise. Justice had been served, but it felt like a hollow victory. He held a small memorial service for Corinne by the ocean. There was no body to bury, so he brought a single photo, the one from his office, of the two of them as kids, smiling without a care in the world. He said a few words, not about the finance genius or the whistleblower, but about his little sister, the girl who loved spy novels and could always figure out the puzzle before he could. As he stood there watching the waves crash against the shore, he realized the heavy weight he'd carried for 3 years was finally gone. The unanswered question had been answered. The truth was terrible, but it was the truth. And in knowing, he could finally begin to grieve. He was no longer just the brother of a missing person. He was the brother of a hero. And that was a story he could finally live with. What do you think drove Marcus Thorne more? Loyalty to his boss, or a fear of his own past catching up with him? We'd love to read your take on it in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. We're dedicated to bringing you the stories that deserve to be heard, and your support helps us continue that mission. Thank you for listening.